Let's do this. The Cult of Hockey podcast by the faithful and for the faithful. I'm David Staples of the Edmonton Journal, and I'm here today with Bruce McCurdy. Hey, Bruce.
Hey, David, how's your vacation going? Rose.
You're cutting in and out, Bruce. So I'm on vacation here. I got some shaky internet going on where I'm at, so we'll see how this works, Bruce. Hopefully this is going to work, but you're freezing up already, and we'll see how it works.
Hopefully the audio works, and they all know what we look like by now. So.
Yeah, this is kind of iffy, I have to say. Yeah. Well, let's just try it for a few minutes and see if it works or not. Okay. So let's talk about Darnell Nurse, Bruce.
Let's.
Big signing today.
Yeah, I'll say.
It's a shocking amount of money, like, honestly. 9.25 million over 8 years.
Times 8.
That is a lot of money. It's more than any of us. It's more than any, like a month ago. Yeah. A month ago, if anyone had said this amount of money, no one would have believed it. So, but things change fast in the NHL.
Yeah, they sure do. And once they do, it's like the old snowball rolling downhill, right? That stuff, it picks up steam pretty fast. And before you know it, you go from one sort of breakthrough contract, and the next thing you know, there's copycats all around the league, right? I mean, Seth Jones, he got signed to that $9.5 million contract, and then since then, there's been 3 other guys fairly comparable to Seth Jones, at least for where they're at in their career and so on, and Zach Werenski and Dougie Hamilton and now Darnell Nurse, each signing very long-term contracts for $9+ million. Huge money, but for defensemen by previously existing standards, there were very few $9 million contracts until this month.
Yeah, and this amount of money over time, like, it really starts to add up. You start to have cap implications. Like, one of the reasons the Oilers got Zach Hyman, for instance, is because the Toronto had all these big contracts, like with Marner and Matthews and Tavares. Now they're all over 10 million, right?
Right.
But we're getting close to that with Draisaitl, McDavid, and Nurse. Not this coming year, but the year after, and that's why Hyman shook loose from the Leafs. And yeah, like, if players I'm worried down the road if Holloway and Bouchard and Broberry work out, that there's going to be repercussions. Puljujärvi, Yamamoto, that they won't be able to keep all those players. They just won't, Bruce, is the truth. If they really work out, if all those players really work out, there just isn't going to be the money. That is a worry for another day, though, of course. It's yet to happen. So I looked at these kind of contracts, Bruce, and what did I find here? I think there's 15 defensemen in the NHL earning more than $8 million a year. And when you look at those deals, when you look at those deals, a number of those deals haven't worked out very well. Erik Karlsson, Drew Doughty. Drew Doughty's still a pretty good player. Karlsson's okay. But I think both those teams, significant overpays. Oliver Ekman-Larsson, obviously a real overpay there. Jacob Trouba, $8 million a year. I think they view that as an overpay in New York. And PK Subban really didn't work out either over time. So that's 5 of the 15, and 5, and the other ones are so new: Werenski, Seth Jones, Makar, Dougie Hamilton. It's kind of hard to tell, and then on the bubble that are kind of working out, you could say John Carlson in Washington, Brent Burns in San Jose until now, at least. I don't know what to think of Thomas Chabot in Ottawa, if they're getting full value there. Peter Angelo in Las Vegas is a good signing, I think.
They're getting their minutes.
Roman Josi and in Vegas, but it's kind of a little bit iffy, eh? It's a little iffy on these long-term contracts with some of these guys that tend to get this kind of money.
Well, yeah, especially when you're gambling 6 and 7, 8 years down the road. I mean, I don't have to
What do you
uh,
think?
remind you or our listeners of any further than Oscar Clefbaum of what can happen to even a really good contract, where you sign a guy long term at 4 million and change, and you think you're set for a long time, and then the guy goes and gets hurt, and all of a sudden you're left with uh, a problem. You know that the contract, at least it's not like huge money that's sinking the salary cap, but it's still, even that good contract has caused them all kinds of grief just in their salary cap management this year. So you're always taking risks when you go that deep on a player. And in the case of Darnell Nurse, I mean, he's going to be, what, 35 years old at the end of this puppy, or 34 at least. I think 34, turning 35 in 2030.
Yeah,
So,
yeah,
that's a long way down the road. On the other hand, uh, in between the end of his entry-level contract and now, they got him at cut rates on 2 contracts where they paid him, a bridge deal for less than what they would have been paying if they'd have gone deep with him originally. So you got to take those into account. The Oilers got some excellent, relatively cheap years out of Darnell Nurse, and he's done nothing but outperform his contracts to this point. But he's got a hell of a job on his hands to outperform 9.25 million. Earth to David. He froze on my screen.
Bruce, you're fading in and out. Like
okay.
I can only hear you. I can. It's your commentary. So what I'm hoping is that somehow
it's getting recorded.
Maybe Skype is picking up at your end. Okay. It's getting recorded, and what I'm hearing isn't what's going to be recorded. I have. Right.
Well, give it a listen before you publish it, and if it's not fit to listen to, then I guess we'll just go without.
Yeah, and that cut in and that also cut in and out. So
yeah, no, you're freezing at my
We'll see what's
too,
happening.
So.
We may have to re-record it tomorrow. I'm going to be in a different place with better internet, so maybe we can do it then. But we'll just continue on for a few minutes and see what we get out of this. Maybe it'll work. Right. Bruce, there's here's the plus side. They're trying to win a cup. They're trying to win a cup in the next few years. They need a number 1 D-man. They're trying to win a cup. They need a number 1 D-man. This is their best bet for that. Where are they going to get a player to replace? If they didn't sign Darnell Nurse, where are they going to get a player to replace him in the next 3 or 4 years? Good luck with that. And he has consistently improved. If you're going to he's got to earn this contract. He's got to get better. The interesting thing about him is he's 26 and he's gotten better pretty much every year.
Every year.
So there is that chance that will happen. And the other thing I like about it is the contract doesn't end when he's 30, 31. If he had signed a 4-year deal, that would have been the case. Yep. And if that had been the case, he might have signed an 8-year deal when he was 30 or 31, like Brent Seabrook did. Right. And so this takes him right through his peak and near peak seasons. Mm-hmm. He'll be done as a near peak player by 34, 35, I think. Hopefully he'll make it that far. If he does, that's great.
Duncan Keith is still a peak player at 38.
This is just one more kind of bet on the near term that might have really negative long-term consequences. And if they win a cup, of course, there's going to be lots of players to sign, and that's going to be a problem again because of all these big contracts now with Nurse and Draisaitl and McDavid leading the way.
Well, the 3 of them, $30.25 million starting in 2022-23 when Nurse's contract kicks in. So that's $10 million each for 3 players, taking the top nearly 40% off of your salary cap. And then you got the rest to divvy up among 20 guys to make up your 23-man team. and you're going to run out of dollars pretty fast. In fact, we've already seen that this summer. Even without this new Nurse contract kicking in, the Oilers had a lot of cap space, and before you knew it, they didn't have any cap space. It was done. And I guess the debate rages as to how much they improved the team with that money. There are some encouraging signs. I mean, Dom Decision from The Athletic, he wrote a post about all the off-season moves of the teams, and he tried to sort of take um, uh, the circumstances out of it and simply model which teams had improved themselves the most simply by who came in and who came out of their team. And he had Edmonton ranked second out of 32 teams for the most improved in the NHL. This is Dom Lucian, who many Oilers fans think is an Oilers hater, but he just trusts his mathematical models, and those models don't always like the Oilers. Well, this one does. So there are reasons to be optimistic.
The analytics show Fogel, the analytics, shot metrics that he puts a lot of faith in, show Hyman and Fogel to be good players, right? So it's not surprising that he'd be on board with those moves. He should be, right? If he believes in those numbers, and he does, he's just following those numbers. So those same analytics don't make Keith and Cody Ceci. Well, there's some question about Cody Ceci. How did just the shot metrics make him look, Bruce?
Just so. I mean, he's done better since he went to Toronto and Pittsburgh the last 2 years than he was in Ottawa. And I think we see with defensemen generally, especially defensemen, that their shot shares are often a function of their teams because they play with all the different forwards over the course of time. At least on most teams they do. And this is where the Darnell Nurse experiment is interesting in that in what turned out to be his platform season, they gave him an abundance of time playing with the very top players on the team as a 5-man unit. So we don't know to what extent that influenced Nurse's numbers for the better. Whereas most guys like Thomas Chabot, he would be spending time with the first, second, third, and fourth lines. And if it's a bad team, he's probably going to be at 45%, no matter where he's at as a player. So it's. I looked at the shot shares. I did 2 posts this week where I looked at the some of the underlying stats of the 3 new Oiler forwards, and then another one on the 3 defensemen. 2 of whom are new, and the other one they re-signed in Tyson Barrie. And the shot shares were very promising for the forwards, less so for the defensemen, but more mixed up for the defensemen. And I think it was because those guys are moving around between teams. And then I did a whole bunch of work for my post last night on Darnell Nurse, comparing him to the other 3 guys that we just talked about that were signed, right? Werenski, Seth Jones, and Hamilton, and the comparisons, like I didn't bother publishing it because it didn't really tell me anything useful. The guys that played on good teams, namely Dougie Hamilton, he had great shot shares. Nurse had pretty good. He was on a pretty good team. The other 2 guys were on terrible teams, and they had terrible shot shares. And I was thinking, it just told me that Columbus Blue Jackets had a bad team, even with Seth Jones and Zach Werenski both on it. But what does that tell me about Seth Jones and Zach Werenski? I'm not sure. The Blue Jackets just had a terrible team.
Well, this is my whole idea about shot shares. This is what they do, right? So this is what, especially with defensemen, like I just think they reflect. Now you could have a player possibly who's good enough to really impact the shot shares of weak players, like raise them up. Like let's say Chris Pronger in his prime. I think that some players might be good enough. Like if you surround them with mediocre players, you might actually get really good shot shares. But I just generally think they reflect the quality of the teammates, and also taking into account the quality of the opposition. There's this strange balancing act, these numbers between those 2 things, and it's actually hard to know where one starts and the other one ends. And where the individual is in all of that, well, good luck, especially with defensemen. I actually think the shot shares are a little bit more for forwards, especially like the goal, like, X goals for, Corsi for, Fenwick for, all like the 4 numbers. Forwards can, I think, I think they can have an impact on that.
Well, Dougie
But
Hamilton sure had great numbers. Dougie Hamilton had wonderful. He was like 57% in everything from Corsi to high danger chances to expected goals to actual goals. 57%. It was just, but whether that was him or whether that was Carolina, you know, I mean, obviously he's good, and the defense is a big reason why Carolina is good. But it just left me kind of scratching my head as to what it meant. So this time around, I just sort of
yeah.
took a pass from trying to explain it because I wasn't sure I was going to be able to do it.
I mean, my take on Nurse is like he has become quite a fine offensive hockey player. Like
Mm-hmm.
he's always been good transporting the puck. He showed a little bit more composure with the puck, holding the puck, making plays with it. And he's got a good shot. He's a dynamic and explosive attacker who can join the rush and get some results. Like he's a direct hockey player. He gets the puck, he goes to the net, and he slaps it home. And there's some questions about his high shooting percentage this year, which are fair questions. I'm I'm not in love, honestly, Bruce, with his defensive play. Like, I think he's a good defender, but against tough competition, he's not Adam Larsson. He's not as good as Adam Larsson on defense right now. Adam Larsson, I thought, was a much better shutdown D-man. Nurse is actually pretty good. It's hard to play against those players all the time, and Nurse and Larsson tend to. So I'm not saying Nurse is bad. I just think he's kind of, he's kind of like where Clefbaum was. He was okay at it. I don't see him, though, as an elite shutdown defenseman defensively. And I think actually that's the next step he has to take. In the past, some of his reads have been bad. He's been a bit of a wanderer in the defensive zone. And I think we saw less of that last year. But I do think just his one-on-one defensive fundamental play, he gets beat now and then. So, and to me, it's kind of surprising because he's got all the tools. Mm-hmm. Of course, every defenseman gets beat now and then, but just he gets beat more than a guy like Larsson did. And if Nurse was to take that step up and become that defender, who just gets beat as little as any other D-man in the NHL against tough competition, he's got that potential. And if he does, he will earn that money. He will be that player, because that player essentially is Chris Pronger. I mean, someone with Nurse is a pretty good attacker right now. He does need to improve his defensive play. That's how I see it.
Well, yeah, he is a good attacker. I mean, this is not just last year. Like, I'm reading in places, well, he had one good year and he cashed in on it. And this is not true. He had at least 4 good years. Yes. Offensively, he's led the Oilers in goals from the blue line 4 years in a row. He led him in assists and points the first 2 of those years, and then the last 2, because he hasn't played the power play, and because Clefbaum and Barry have played the power play, they got more points than him, but not more goals. And he's, like I did his ranking over the last 3 years, first in games played, 5th in ice time, 1st in even strength ice time, 5th in goals, 7 in points. This is league wide. 4th in shots, 5 in individual scoring chances, 5th in individual expected goals. Out of 186 defensemen in the league, 6 per team, and single digit, top 10 in every one of those categories. Of course, that's not all the categories. You could list a million categories, but it wasn't like I was cherry picking, looking for ones that he did good in. These are the same categories I've been using all week and comparing other players. And it just jumps out. And he's had his shooting percentage over 3 years, 6.24%, 29th among defensemen. So pretty good. But, over a sustained period of time, that's still a number 1 defenseman. Anybody in the top 31 is arguably a number 1 defenseman. And that was the worst of any of his stats, was 29th. And that was shooting percentage. So, I mean, these are all sort of offensive type, puck control type stats. But he looks good time and again on the individual stuff. Like, he makes stuff happen.
Look where he came from, too. I remember, 5-6 years ago, like 2015, 16, even 2016, 17, he was not putting up the points. Like, he was a marginal kind of attacking player at that point. He could carry the puck fast, but he'd make the same play. He'd get it to center ice and then dump it in, or he'd get it over the blue line and then dump it in or circle the net and not pass it to anybody. Like, he's not that player on the attack anymore. So it is kind of a, so do hockey players improve at the NHL level? We have seen it before our own eyes
Right.
with Darnell Nurse. And so if that continues on the attack, like if we see even more composure with the puck and we see sounder defensive fundamentals, that could be good news for the Oilers on this big contract. And Bruce, the reason I'm okay with it is, they really do have to win in the next 3 or 4 years with McDavid. I mean, there's just no doubt about it. This is the window. So let's start winning. And you can't, like, I would have preferred a 4-year contract for $10 million a year, like overpay on the shorter term, personally. But
that takes
they
even
got
more
him. They
off the
got him.
salary
This
cap.
is one of these hometown heroes. They've got locked up
For 15 years, David. He's committed the first 15 years of his professional career, of his life's work, to playing in Edmonton, Alberta. I think he deserves at least a little bit, smidgen of respect for that. I mean, there's a lot of shit talking going on about Darnell Nurse, and I'm kind of a little bit sick of it. I mean, things worked out for him. Like the timing for this thing, it couldn't have been better. There are people who justifiably for years have been saying that next contract is really going to hit hard. And that time is now, and yes, it did. And just the tumblers fell in place for him with the Jones signing, with all these other ones in front of him. And the Oilers really needing to work this out this summer. There's no way they wanted this dragging over them all next season. Can you imagine the distraction we'd be having? How many headlines would we write next year? Nurse's contract not signed yet. What's going to happen in June 30th? It wouldn't be good for the team. So it's better to have it resolved right when he signed the 2-year extension that took him to the cusp of free agency. My take was they'll let him play the first year of it. They got him under contract so they don't have the pressure of having to sign him next contract, next summer, but they want to sign him next summer before that last year. So it's dealt with, and they did. So, but the timing worked out great for him that he really made a windfall of probably, I'd say 1.5 million more than I was expecting.
Yeah.
So,
fundamental of that critique, though, Bruce, like, is this warning that he's going to get this big contract? I think embedded in that critique is the idea that he's not going to be this good going forward. Like, they think this is people who make that critique isn't part of it. Like, well, he's had this career year. He's cashing in on it, and he's not going to be like this again, like in terms of his offensive numbers. So I mean, because he could easily have a good, if he keeps having years like this on the attack, that's a $9 million defenseman. And the fact is, if he had played more on the power play, he could easily have 10 more points this year. His power play points per 60 was not lower than Barry's. It was similar, if I recall correctly.
He just didn't get much time.
He didn't get much time, so he could easily had 10, 15 more points if he had been the top power play guy. And so, I don't. Is he going to regress, or is he going to keep getting better? And that's where this contract either works out or it doesn't. If he keeps improving like we always thought he would. I mean, a lot of the people now complaining about the contract, Bruce, would have had Darnell Nurse traded out of Edmonton 3 or 4 years ago, and maybe they'll be proven to be right. Maybe this contract will be a major disaster for the Oilers. But on the other hand, it's kind of something to celebrate about a player who has gotten better every single year and has worked his way in to be a true number one D-man. I don't think anyone can say he's not. I think that would be...
Oh, people can, because they do.
But it's not a fair comment. Like, it's not rooted in reality, at least for last season. He was a number one D-man last year. And by NHL, how could he not? How could he not be considered to be in the top 20, top 15? At the outside, and for NHL D-men this past year, he just simply was. So.
Well, these past 3 years, he's played more ice time at even strength than any other defenseman or any other player in the National Hockey League. How is that not a number one? Like, you're deluding yourself if you're saying that's a 3-4.
We both like Darnell Nurse. We're both Darnell Nurse fans. Yeah, that's fair.
He's growing, and to some extent, a big contract is something to be celebrated in the sense that here's a player that actually has done his job and earned the big ticket and earned it, I mean, he earned his chance for the big payday. And we can grouse about how big the payday is versus what we think his value is. And, how, the whole idea ultimately is you have to outperform your cap hit to help your team win. You don't just have to be a good player on the ice, but you have to justify,
Yeah.
because it's,
Yeah.
that's the
Hard
currency
to
that the
do
game is
at that
played in,
point.
right? And it's, but I mean, he's been a workhorse for years. He hasn't missed any games. He's been and he's got he's reached that point where it was time to pay him, and he got paid. And another criticism I've heard, and some justification. Like, I thought Leon's 8.5 million might be the upper limit, where they kind of try and set
Yeah. Me too.
team limit, not at Connor's salary, but at Leon's. Tampa's
Yeah.
done it, 9.5 million. That's the top they go in Tampa. And Hedman got it, and then Kucherov got it, and then
Right.
Vasilevsky got it. And they all got the same, 9.5. They didn't go above that. So I thought maybe 8.5. But there's huge differences. I mean, Leon signed that after his entry-level contract. He had 4 RFA years to go and 4 UFA years on the 8-year deal that he signed. The salary cap at that time was 75 million. It's gone up to 81.5 million. Nurse has played all the way through his RFA years. He played 2 years at 3.2. He played 2 years at 5.6. Now he's getting paid. But if you say Leon, in the first 8 years after his ELC, he got the $68 million contract. Well, Nurse, in the first 8 years after his ELC, when you add all those contracts up, it's something like 54.6 million. So considerably less than Draisaitl. It's just he's ramped up because they signed him to these short contracts rather than going deep on the very first opportunity.
Yeah. Well, we'll see. Well, we shall see, Bruce. It's are you generally okay with it? Like, what percentage? Like, let's say at the end of 8 years, we're going to look back at this contract. What percentage odds do you think there are that this will work? That will say, hey, that was a good deal for the Oilers. That was a good idea. What percentage would you give that?
Well, I'll say the same thing about it that I would say and did say about the Ryan Nugent-Hopkins contract and Zach Hyman contract. It's really the first 4 and 5 years of the 8 that we're most concerned with. If things fall apart and Leon and Connor leave town in the mid-2020s, Nurse's residual contract will be the least of our concerns. What we want to do is try and win now. But the argument is, by overpaying Nurse now, by paying more than the critics think that he's worth, his value against cap, like he's taken too much of the cap, and it hurts the rest of the team. You're frozen, David. I can see myself.
There you are.
Anyway, I just gave a soliloquy on why the first 4 years are more important than the last 4. The first 5 years are more important than the last 3.
Well, Bruce, I don't think this podcast works, so let's cut it off here. And
all right,
we'll return to it. Yeah, I'll vet it. If it doesn't work, I'll just call you tomorrow and we'll try again. But if it did, I'll post this. We'll see. I have a feeling this didn't work, but anyway, we'll see. Thanks for talking.
Yeah. Enjoy your time in the mountains, David.
Thanks. And in the meantime, and in between times, this has been another edition of the Cult of Hockey podcast.
Thanks for listening, everyone.
Thanks, Bruce. Thanks for trying. Let's see what happens here.